Welcome to Nonprofit Thrive, a podcast where we learn from the humans who are helping nonprofits succeed in the digital world. Now, let's get started with the show.
Welcome. I'm Ben Freda, host of the show, where we share the stories of leaders in the nonprofit space, the people behind the organizations, the foundations, the programs, the companies that help nonprofits change the world. Past guests we've had on the show have included some of our clients in some cases, wonderful people like Hillary Wardinger of Save the Children, who spoke to us about how to run a massive online resource library critical to the effort to reduce infant mortality around the world. She also talked about knowledge management more generally, including accessibility topics in it, which was fascinating. We've also speak to sort of experts in certain niches. So last week, actually, we spoke to Francis Court of Wondersphere, which is a great design firm in London, who talked about working for a foundation doing a web design for them, which ended up turning into an office design project. Sort of a fascinating conversation about ideas for what the heck to do with your office in a post-COVID world. Before we get to today's guest, who is someone I'm very excited to talk about, I do have to tell you, this podcast is brought to you by the folks at BFC Digital, where we help nonprofits thrive on the web. If you work at a nonprofit or a foundation or another type of social change organization, I bet you think that dealing with your website is a pain in the butt. Maybe it's buggy, maybe it's broken, maybe the web developer you hired a couple years ago is now MIA. But something about it makes you go, oh my God. We hear that a lot, that oh my God. BFC Digital exists to fix all of that. At BFC Digital, we help our clients succeed on the web by being the friendly, optimistic nerds you wish you had sitting right next to you. We can help fix your bugs. We can evolve your web presence. We can design new campaign pages for you. We can integrate that new donation system that your fundraiser is so psyched about into the site. In short, we can help you take advantage of the digital space to accomplish your mission. And we can do it without ever asking you to fill out a support ticket, because support tickets are the worst thing in the world. Go to bfcdigital.com to learn more. So today, I'm exceptionally excited to have on the show Emily Bernhardt, who is currently based at the Woodland Park Zoo, a zoo in Seattle, which I've been to. It's beautiful. She is the Empathy Network Specialist for a program called the Advancing Conservation Through Empathy for Wildlife. It's a network that's run out of the zoo there. Her work is motivated by her curiosity to understand different human and nature interactions. And I love this part, her penchant for misunderstood animals. Outside of work, she is a backpacker. She bakes sourdough. She climbs rocks, throws pottery. We've worked together for almost a year, so I know a lot about Emily, and I'm really excited to talk to you more and get to know you a little bit better and know what you're trying to do at ACE. So thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to talk to you.
I love your background, because you can see it does make it very clear, advancing conservation for empathy through empathy for wildlife. Now, before we get to that, I do just want to do what I usually do on the show, which is sort of understand you and your motivations and how you ended up working at the zoo. So first question really is, where did you grow up and what did you want to do when you were a kid?
So I grew up in the Midwest. I'm from Southwest Michigan, from Kalamazoo. And I grew up kind of in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of farm fields. And so I spent a lot of time outside. And both of my parents were scientists, and they were really keen on whatever I was interested in. They supplied me with en masse. And so when I was really young, my first interests that I really latched onto were dinosaurs.
Wow.
I was a dinosaur and volcano kid, and nice. I also had my Disney princess dress on, and that was all I wanted to do. And I was really interested in the carnivores, so Velociraptor, Deinonychus, T-Rex, all of the big kind of iconic carnivores. And I was like, I'm going to be a paleontologist. That is what I'm going to do.
Right.
Yeah. And I had documentaries and books, and I didn't watch Jurassic Park until I was an adult because that like bothered me. I was like, people and dinosaurs, they don't exist together. That's not a thing.
So like you had like a factual objection to Jurassic Park.
Yes. Yeah, I was like, I cannot do this. I didn't watch it until I was like 19 or something like that.
That is funny. It's a great movie, dude. I love that movie. Yeah.
And yes, it's one of my favorites now. I was Laura Dern's character for Halloween a couple years ago. Like, fantastic. But yeah, I didn't see it until I was like fully out of my dinosaur phase. But yeah, rural Michigan.
So favorite carnivore. Your favorite dinosaurs were carnivores. Did you have one particular favorite?
I really liked Velociraptor. I liked all the raptors specifically. But yeah.
And what did you do? Is that because they were like super smart and like cunning and all that?
Yeah, they're super smart. And I thought it was really neat that these animals that are like the size of a chicken, really, like they're very small. Yeah. They're not really large. Like they're not the Jurassic Park sized Velociraptors.
Right.
Were this like kind of powerhouse in, I think it was the Cretaceous or the Jurassic. I don't remember which one they lived in.
I think Cretaceous. I know this because my 8-year-old went through a crazy dinosaur period. So yeah, I know. So I think they're Cretaceous. Yeah.
Yeah. And they're social. And it was very, I think that those interests, like if I think back on it, like had a very solid through line into like my interests.
No joke. Yeah. No kidding. So your parents were really supportive of this paleontology idea.
Yeah.
Okay. And what kind of scientists were they?
So they're both microbiologists. So completely like separate. And they both work in like pharmaceuticals. So like could not be more different than what I was interested in. But they were both like we have a kid who's interested in science.
Yeah.
Incredible.
That's great.
Incredible.
Yeah, that's super cool. Did you have brothers and sisters or was it just you?
I have one younger sister who is not interested in science.
Got you. So you're the family. So you're that generation scientist.
Yeah.
All right. So you were in paleontology, into science. How long did that last? And when did you realize, okay, actually paleontology is not what I want to do? Because to be honest, I do read that this is like one of the golden ages of paleontology now because there's so many discoveries of new species and stuff. So you could have done it, I would think. But yeah. But anyway, what made you not want to do it or switch?
I think ultimately, I think there were two reasons. I like latched onto something for like 3 to 4 years, was super obsessed with it for 3 to 4 years. And then I was like, okay, I'm done. So I had my dinosaur phase, I had my volcano phase, but I think that happened early enough to where the interest in nature and being outside and just like the natural world aspect of it kind of stuck. So yeah, I lived up in rural Michigan, spent a lot of time outside. I was digging in the dirt, was seeing animals all the time. And I think the main difference there was dinosaurs are dead, I guess with the exception of birds. But like the ones that I like thought were really cool and were really interested in, they weren't here anymore. And I couldn't tangibly touch them. Like that's the same issue that I had with microbiology is it's too small, I can't touch it. Whereas with paleontology, I was like, it's gone. I cannot touch it.
That's true.
So what is still here that mimics or is very similar to what I found interesting in the dinosaurs and the ecosystems that I was reading about. And it ended up being social carnivores. And so I carried that through line, I think, through all of my years growing up. And instead of wanting to become a paleontologist and study extinct carnivores, I shifted and I was like, I want to become a zoologist and I want to study social African carnivores.
Wow. Okay.
And I was specifically interested in African wild dogs initially because like Velociraptor, they're extremely social, they're pack hunters, they're extremely smart. There's a video clip from, I think it's the first Planet Earth. It's like the aerial clip of them hunting an impala and like the coordinated
Yes, I remember this
strategy for that. And I was like, I want to figure that out. Like, that is so cool. People say that animals aren't intelligent and that animals don't have foresight and that they can't plan. But you're clearly seeing this play out amongst a group of animals. And I'm like, there's no way that this is all just like happenstance and instinct.
Or instinct,
and like,
right, yeah.
Yeah. So like what is the driver? and what are the mechanisms behind these really complex behaviors that we see. And that is kind of, yeah, what led me on my career path, was that kind of core interest.
So how smart are they? Are they communicating when they're doing these hunts? What are they being creative or what?
I don't know what's happening during the hunt itself, but there was a study that came out. I think it was like in 2016 or 2017, that showed that they will like sneeze as a communication kind of behavior to each other to signal like, hey, are we ready to roll? Are we doing this? And then I guess I think it's the number of sneezes that one dog will do and the amount of responses that they get from other dogs that dictate whether or not the pack goes out and hunts.
Wow.
But in terms of like what's happening when they're all separated and what's going on, I don't think anybody knows.
No one
that.
knows.
Yeah.
Totally. That makes sense. That's funny. So, okay. So you were you in college doing this? Were you like, is that where did you actually study zoology in college?
So you did. I went to Michigan State University, and I got a degree in zoology.
Is that a hard degree? Like, are there a lot of, because I hear the same thing about, veterinary degrees or anything with animals. It's very attractive. Like people really like to do it. Is it hard to get a zoology degree or is it not? Is it something you can just do if you want to?
So that depends on, I think, the school you go to. I was extremely picky. There's like two big universities in Michigan. There's Michigan State, and then there's University of Michigan. And I was really set on having the word zoology written on my certificate, like when I graduated.
This is when you were considering schools. You were 17 years old.
Yeah,
you're like, I want to have zoology written on my degree.
Zoology will be written underneath my name. And a lot of programs, it's either called integrative biology, which is actually what the department I was in changed after my freshman year of college, but I'd already declared my major, so it was zoology was going to be on my certificate. And I was like, oh my gosh, thank God.
You got that. You had it. That's really funny. That's great. Nailed it.
Nailed it. And so yeah, that was it. Like I went zoology on my degree. And so I think in terms of the content of a program, it doesn't differ college to college, but it's what that is called. I think zoology programs with the name zoology are harder to come by than they were like 10 or 15 years ago. I think most of them are integrative biology or a straight up biology degree with a focus in zoology or something.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. But you nailed it. You got that. You got the zoology on the
got it.
Pretty sweet.
Yeah.
And okay, so is that like what is that like a bunch of different stuff about biology and about the environment and behavioral biology and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So the way that my college had it structured out is there was the large zoology degree program. And then within that degree program, you could have a specialty. And so there were, I think, 5 different tracks that you could go down. One of them was the zoo and aquarium track. I didn't actually do that track at that point. I did not think I was going to end up working in the zoo and aquarium industry. And so instead, I focused, my specialties were on ecology and evolution. So that was one of them. And then my other specialty was behavior and neuroscience. So I was really interested in essentially how do animals evolve in their environments to behave in such a way that maximizes their reproductive success and their overall survival, and like looking at the mechanisms and the drivers for behavior. Yeah.
Which, oh my God, all of these things go straight into the empathy topic. But before, and I keep wanting to jump there, but before we do, I just want to get to this point. So you graduate, and what's your first job out of college, or is it Woodland Park Zoo? I don't know. And then how did you end up there?
Yeah. My first job out of college, I was a research assistant and camp manager for the Michigan State University Mara Hyena project. Which is one of the, it's a very long name. When I was like writing my bio for this, I realized that almost all of the titles that I've had since graduating are just these excessively long titles, and they don't have abbreviations. And so I just have to like slog through this sentence.
Doesn't that just mean that you're really, really important?
I hope so.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. Cool.
But I had volunteered with this lab all through my undergraduate. And I went to college and I knew that I wanted to do stuff with African carnivores, with social African carnivores. And there wasn't anybody at my university who studied African wild dogs, but there was somebody at my university who studied spotted hyenas.
Perfect.
And I was like, that's close enough.
Mm-hmm.
I know nothing about hyenas, but I'm going to figure it out. And so I got my
Yeah.
foot in the door in the lab, and I worked for a handful of graduate students all through my undergraduate career, studying the influence of human, at that time we called it like human disturbance, because it was very much a like human and nature, they are separate and they should not touch each other. So it was
Right.
studying human disturbance on the reproductive success of female hyenas. And so how many cubs are
Huh.
they producing, and like
Yeah.
what is their reproductive success? Are they parenting differently based on these different environments that they live in? And
Mm.
so for 4 years, I worked with various graduate students, kind of doing different aspects of that work.
Mm.
And then that was all in the lab. And then, yeah, my first year after college, I actually went out to the field in Kenya, in the Masai
Mm.
Mara, which is where
Wow.
this field site is, and got to kind of live out my goal of researching African carnivores
Yeah.
in the Masai Mara. And it was absolutely incredible. I loved every minute of it. And hyenas are now arguably, I think, my favorite animal.
So when you're doing that, where are you actually living? Like
Mhm.
what are your living in what's your living environment like?
It was, I mean, it was glamping. Like it was
Uh,
roughing it. We were 7 hours from Nairobi, and it
mhm.
was like multiple hours on a dirt road, and um, it was definitely out in the middle of nowhere. But it was like those very nice canvas tents. We had
Mhm.
beds. I had a like desk in my tent that I used as like
Right.
my sink. I had like a bowl full of water, and I would like wash
Yeah,
the
yeah.
plants. Like it
Gotcha.
was very, very nice living. We had a
Okay.
shower,
Hmm.
like very nice living accommodations. And yeah, I was still out in the middle of nowhere though.
Right.
And you were just kind of remote and separate from a lot of stuff. But what's really
Hmm.
cool for me is the way that the reserve is set up is there's kind of two sides to the Masai Mara Reserve. There's one side that is managed kind of publicly, and then there's one side that's managed privately. And the management differences really impact the ecology of those two areas. And so
Really? So how so?
I was on the disturbed side, quote on air quotes around disturbed,
Uh-huh.
because it's the side where kind of patrols are a lot less lax on the borders of the reserve. And so the people who live in that area of Kenya, the Maasai, are nomadic herders traditionally, and they would take their cows in to graze. And so that was kind of this disturbance that we
I
were
see.
looking at, air quotes again, around disturbance of what
Mm.
is the impact of these pastoralists bringing their cattle into
On the,
this protected area,
I see.
eating the grass that is in theory impacting the like prey populations. Hyenas
Yeah.
may in fact even be preying on the cattle in the reserve. Of course, there's a human safety element to all of this as well.
Mm.
And of course, a politics dynamic to
Hmm.
this as well,
For
because a lot of
sure.
these people were displaced to make this reserve. And so
Hmm.
I was on that side of the reserve. So there was a lot more human wildlife interactions and a lot more human wildlife conflict
Mm.
than on the privately managed side, which was very quote unquote pristine. So the
Hmm.
grasses were very tall. There was no signs of really human presence anywhere around or even within the reserve. And
Hmm.
so we had two camps. The project has two camps, one on this
Mm.
public side of the reserve and one on the private side of this reserve, which is really cool because you get to study kind of two different ecologies and two different systems,
Totally.
and how
Totally.
those animals adapt to their environments and all the stimulus and stuff that's happening around them.
So did you come to any conclusions?
Um, from the like work I did with my project or with the project, um, essentially, yes. If you are a
Mm.
mother hyena, regardless of your rank in
Mm.
hyena society, because it's very similar to the British monarchy, is how I like to say it. Like there are high rankers and there are low rankers, and you are born into your spot. And if you
Really?
want to, you can shake it up if you really want
Uh-huh.
to, but it could be really
Uh-huh.
bad for you and a lot of
I
others
see.
around you.
I
Um,
see.
and so yeah, it's very much like your birth order determines your rank in this social group, and
Wow.
that's the law of the land, and
Uh-huh.
it does get shaken up, but it's rare.
Yeah.
And obviously, higher rankers, they have better access to food, they have more social alliances,
Mm.
and so a lot of that does kind of interplay to make them more reproductively successful. So they usually will have more offspring, and their offspring will usually survive to adulthood at a higher rate than a hyena on the lower ranking end of the spectrum. Those hyenas usually have the last access to a kill. They don't have as much social clout or social structure and support. And so it's more likely that their offspring may pass away early, that they won't have enough resources to have offspring as regular of intervals because they're not having as much nutrition. And so if you then throw kind of this human aspect into it, where you have humans interacting with the similar environment and potentially causing stressors on this population, you have that as now this extra kind of interplay in addition to this social structure. And so whether you were a higher or a low ranking hyena, if you lived on the side of the park that had a lot more human, quote unquote, disturbance, human activity, the way that a lot of the moms would parent their cubs is they would just it was a quantity over quality. So it was, I'm going to have offspring a lot more regularly, and I'm going to parent them for a shorter amount of time. Whereas on the quote unquote undisturbed side of the reserve, it was more about quality over quantity. So I'm going to have offspring less frequently and really invest my time into these one or two cubs that I have and stay with them for a longer period of time. And then after they're independent, I'll reproduce again.
And that's just like that's the best way of like dealing with the situation for the highest expected probability outcome or something.
Yeah, I mean, essentially. And yeah, this was like, again, a very simple, just like looking at the notes, kind of comparing these two populations and like how long these moms, I think I looked at like 10 mother offspring pairs on each side. So like a relatively small sample size. But yeah, between those mother offspring pairs, I think I did try to have like a split between high, medium, and low rank to try and like see it across all spectrums. And that was generally the trend that was seen. Is that on the more active side of the reserve in terms of human activity, produce more offspring more regularly. And maybe you'll still have some that are weaning when you have your next round of offspring. And so there's like this weird sibling competition between these like teenagers, quote unquote, and like these newborns. Whereas on the other side, like the cycle has fully completed before the hyena is having her next. Yeah.
That is really, really funny. That's really funny. And just that's not how I would have thought that it would work out. You're like, okay, well, I just got to throw more darts at the dartboard, I guess. I mean, it's a weird way of thinking about it, but that's really fascinating. Okay, so you're there, you're in the reserve, you do that, and you're working on all this stuff for what? How long did you do that?
I did work in the lab. I did that for 4 years, and that was all during my undergrad. And then I did this kind of field work for a year afterwards. So after / during, I think that year in the field, I was really set on going to graduate school right after that. I was really interested in reproductive ecology and this specifically like reproductive success. What makes you reproductively fit in a challenging environment, and like looking at the biological systems of that. So like the thing I didn't do with the hyenas is that I didn't look at hormones. I didn't look at genetics. I didn't do any of the like really like microscope science with that. It was all observational data. And so I was thinking, I'll go to grad school and I'll kind of do the more molecular side of this and kind of get at like, is it stress hormones? Is it like, is it epigenetics? What is it? And I wanted to do that with primates up in Ethiopia. And that was my plan. I was like, I'm going to do this thing. And I was in the field and I was like living my best life. I was having a fantastic time. But I kind of had this realization. I'm in this field because I really like nature. I really like animals. And I really like telling people and getting people excited about what I'm excited about. And everybody that I'm interacting with is kind of already there. And they already know.
Oh, I see. They
already know what's going on. They already know the threats to these animals. They know about the threats to these ecosystems. so I kind of felt like I was in an echo chamber in a sense. And like, that is not
Exactly.
saying anything bad about those people or
No.
anything. I just like,
Right.
I felt like I wasn't having the impact that I
Hmm.
wanted to have. Like when I was
Hmm.
little, I used to put PowerPoints together about animals and like show them to my mom. And I
Oh,
was like, that got her so excited.
that's so
How can
cute.
I mesh these kind of two interests of
Uh-huh.
mine?
Yeah.
And I decided maybe a PhD or graduate school isn't the way to do that.
Mm.
Maybe the way to do that is to work in science education and in
Hmm.
informal education.
Right.
And I'm sure there are kids out there who are as excited about nature as I was. And like,
Hmm.
how cool would it be for me to like be that teacher for them and like have them be able to foster and kind of cultivate this excitement
Yeah,
and be like,
totally.
hey, you can do this. Like, this is a thing that's feasible for you to do as an
Right.
adult. Let's keep having you excited about this.
Yeah.
And so I took a job in South Carolina with Clemson University at they used to have these like camps throughout the state where
Mm.
essentially third through fifth graders, as part of their scientific curriculum, could come during the school year for like 2 nights, 3 days at one of these camps
Cool.
and
Cool.
essentially do like hit their science curriculum, but in a field setting. And
That's awesome.
so I was like at one of these camps, I was at the Barrier Islands, and we learned all about like evolution and niches and like
Cool.
where different animals live actually out in nature. And for a lot of these kids, it was the first time that they were experiencing like the ecosystems of their own backyards. They like hadn't been to
Right.
the Barrier Islands, they hadn't been in the salt marshes. And there is
Right.
just something about like being able to touch or like tactily and physically be in this space where all these things
Mm.
that you're learning about are happening that make them
Mm.
so much more exciting and so much more real.
Mm.
And that to me was super exciting. I absolutely
Mm.
loved doing that. And so that has kind of kept me in this informal education sphere,
Hmm.
um, and has now shifted me into zoos.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So you go from, so you think, all right, I want to be in more of the environment where I'm teaching people. So you're down there doing that. And then how did you end up in Seattle?
I have had this conversation with like a lot of people actually in the past like months about
Mm.
how serendipitous it is that I ended up in this job that I'm in.
Mm.
Um, the hyena role was a year after college. My role
Mm.
in South Carolina was, I think, 4 months. It was not a very, it was
Mm.
like a quarter, like a semester kind of length of
Mm.
time. And I was back home in Michigan trying to figure out like what I wanted to do. And I wasn't sure. I'd only had temporary jobs. I was like 23, 23, I
Mm.
think. I don't know. I was very young. I was
Mm.
very confused. I had no idea what was going on. Um, and did not want to be living at home. And putting all of these like feelers out for job applications, and I just wasn't hearing back from any of them because it's incredibly competitive.
Yeah, right.
And I ended up getting an interview at a zoo in Montana called Zoo
Mm.
Montana.
Hmm.
And it was for a seasonal educator position. And
Okay.
I was like, sweet, awesome. That would take me out of here in like
Yeah.
April. It would go through the summer. That gives me like
Yeah.
6 months, and then I can figure out what I want to do. I had been to Montana before. My mom had given me the option if I could have like a graduation party after my senior year of high school, or I could go on a trip. And so I chose Yellowstone because, again, I'm a
Wow.
dinosaur and volcano kid, so
Yeah,
I wanted to go to the
exactly.
super volcano.
Sure.
And I was like, sweet, I'll go back to Montana.
Yeah.
Had the interview, and the interview went super well. And I got an email later that week, and they were like, hey, we'd love to have you as a seasonal. Also, we have a full-time position that just opened up in our education department. Would you
Nice.
actually be interested in that?
Right.
And a key piece of this puzzle is this is February of 2020.
Uh-huh.
Um, and I was sitting at home and I was like, oh, I just got offered a full-time position. Like, I haven't had a full-time position offered to me. I really have no reason to say no. Like, I want
Yeah.
to get out of Kalamazoo. I want to stop living at home. And so I decided to take the full-time position at Zoo Montana. And I moved out there at the beginning of March of 2020.
Oh my God.
Um, and I started the day
Uh-huh.
that the US declared an emergency,
Nice.
state of emergency because of the
Nice.
pandemic.
Uh-huh.
And then later that week, they let go all of the people that they had hired for seasonals. And
Dude. But
yeah,
that was not you
so that was
anymore.
not me.
It
It
was
was
not
not
you.
me anymore.
Wow,
Um,
you barely thought. Wow, that is very lucky.
yeah,
That is really
and
cool.
it was through that role at Zoo Montana that I got introduced to the network.
Yeah.
Because Zoo Montana is one of our
He's one,
partner
right?
organizations. Um, and so it really comes down to if I had just made the like flip side of that decision,
Yep.
I don't know. I genuinely have no idea what I would be doing
Yeah, I know.
right
That's
now.
funny.
Yeah.
That's
Um,
funny.
it's
That's
wild.
like fate.
Yeah.
So, yeah, totally. So you work there for a while, and then you
Hmm.
go to the network.
Hmm.
And can you tell me just a little bit? Well, I know, but we can tell the listeners. Okay, dearest listeners, can you just tell us a little bit about what the network is, what it's all about? I know it's advancing conservation through empathy, and I know all
Hmm.
about this. But what is the idea behind it?
Hmm.
How did that start? And what are you guys trying to do?
Yeah. So Woodland Park Zoo, which is based in Seattle, is kind of the hub or the backbone for this network of zoos and aquariums that are using empathy as a interpretive strategy when talking to guests. So think about if you're a guest going to a zoo and you are talking to a staff member, whether that's a zookeeper in front of an exhibit or you're attending a program in an amphitheater. How is that message being delivered to you? And so all of the zoos and aquariums in this network are working on using empathy, so tapping into people's emotions and not just the facts to get them motivated and feel like they have the agency to take conservation action. And
Got
so
it.
the name of our network is, the Advancing Conservation Through Empathy for Wildlife Network, which we can shorten to ACE for Wildlife because it is very long. And yeah, we're currently 27 zoos and aquariums throughout the United States. They're all kind of practicing and trying out these practices that have been established together instead of 27 zoos and aquariums independently reinventing the wheel and doing things kind of in their own individual silos, doing
Hmm.
this collectively and learning from each other because often a struggle that's happening over at this zoo or aquarium is also happening over at this zoo or aquarium.
Right.
It's going to be a lot easier and probably going to make a better product if you talk to each other about the problem that you're having as opposed to trying to fix it
Exactly.
within your own silos. And so, yeah, basically fostering this kind of mini community within the larger zoo and aquarium community around this focus on
Hmm.
empathy as a motivator for
Hmm.
having a conservation ethos or a conservation mindset.
You have, and I know there is because I think I saw this when we were doing the website. But is there like research on how effective empathy practices are versus what the alternatives would be, which I guess is more factual type practices?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we do have a handful of key kind of resources that were developed between like 2015 and 2018 when this work was just starting out about what are the interpretive techniques or the effective empathy practices that
Hmm.
will help push a guest or move a guest along this spectrum from maybe not feeling connected to this animal, not really realizing what this animal does in their environment, how this
Mm.
animal is important, how this animal kind of fits into a larger scheme of things, and how I, as the guest, can help
Mm.
this animal. And so
Hmm.
there are some key pieces of literature that have both been created by the zoos and aquariums within the network and also scientific researchers who were consultants for the network at that time
Mm.
about conservation behaviors and motivators for taking conservation action in zoos and aquariums specifically
Mm. Hmm.
that folks within our network have access to.
Cool. And so, what is the what's the general feeling like? So I guess sometimes I feel like when I'm thinking about environmental issues, climate change, or whatever, it can get all the bad news and the facts can kind of get overwhelming. So
Mm-hmm.
is that kind of one of the things you guys are trying to do with empathy? Like rather than all right, so you're not talking about the thousands of pounds of CO2 or whatever in the climate example, but you're focusing on one animal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that kind of the
Yeah.
deal? Okay.
Yeah. So even I think just in science communication, I would argue
Mm.
as a whole, it's people have kind of been operating off of this idea that if people just know the facts and they
Mm.
know how bad things are, that in and of itself, knowledge, is going to be what pushes people into behavior change. And research shows that that's not always the case. It can be the case for some people, but oftentimes you kind of feel this choice paralysis of like, there's all of these things that are happening, and there's all of these things that I am contributing to. I don't even know how I can begin to make a difference. Like I'm overwhelmed. I'm going to check out, and I'm stepping back. I'm doing nothing. And it becomes really overwhelming and really kind of anxiety inducing, especially when you're talking about the climate crisis and just this like very scary idea. And so the kind of foundation of this empathy work is it's really hard for people to think about big abstract concepts and then make a change with it. Climate change being a perfect example. It's really hard to think about conservation on a species level for the average person, especially if you're not trained in that. So the empathy practices in a zoo or aquarium focus that all through one individual animal. So you could go to a zoo or aquarium and you could be learning about, I'm going to use wolves as an example. You could be learning about wolves as a monolithic species and the threats to wolves, and also why wolves are so cool and why you should do stuff to protect wolves. Or, and I'm going to use an example from Zoo Montana where I used to work, you could learn about Simpson. And Simpson is a gray wolf who came to live at Zoo Montana in 2021. And Simpson really likes to do X, Y, and Z, and he loves to play with his friend Onyx. And wolves like Simpson and Onyx can actually be found right here in our backyards in Montana. And some of the things that we can do to help keep wolves like Simpson wild are make sure that we're not feeding wildlife, or that we're like keeping a safe distance from wildlife when we're out in places like Yellowstone National Park. And that's really important because wolves are what we call keystone species. And they kind of keep our ecosystems intact, and they make sure that nature is doing what nature needs to do for all of us, whether you're a wolf or an elk or a human.
Wow, that is wow. It's like you've done that before. It's almost as if you've told that before, because that was really very smooth and very cool.
So, yeah, it just like it takes these big concepts that are really difficult to think about in short intervals, especially like at a zoo or aquarium. You have a really short period of time to get your message through to a guest.
Yeah.
And so if you can get that hook in very quickly, and instead of this is a gray wolf, this is Simpson, that tells you that Simpson is an individual, and Simpson has wants and preferences and dislikes and quirks in the way that you do as well. And it makes this species monolith not actually seem so generic and big, and then takes the issue and kind of, oh, well, I'm going to do this to help Simpson, and I'm going to do this to help wolves like Simpson. Instead of I'm just helping wolves, like that's this amorphous other that exists over here that I don't really know what's going on with, but I know Simpson. And so it focuses these actions through this individual that a guest is seeing, interacting with, kind of that physical sensation of sharing that space, as opposed to take action because you know that it's important. Which are two very different kind of.
Yeah, there are 3,052 of these gorillas left, and now there's, or whatever. Yeah, like that.
Right.
That sort of, I mean, that's scary.
Yeah.
Right. But I'm not sure what what you can do. So one of the things I like that you just said is that like the quirks that animals have. Which does actually, now that I think about it, like that is because we all have weird quirks that we're worried about. Animals have quirks too, I suppose. I never really thought about that.
Yeah, and they do. I think each animal is unique, and it's really easy for people to think about that with their pets, right? It's super easy to recognize that if you have two dogs or two cats, that they are completely separate individuals. And this cat is going to behave in this way, and this cat's going to behave in this way. And maybe, cat A really likes like your brother and despises you, but cat B, that's your cat. And so it's really easy for you to like think about that with animals kind of that are in your immediate spaces. And it's a lot harder for people to do that with wild animals. And so it's only been very recently, as ethology, like the study of animal behavior, and cognitive neuroscience and comparative neuroscience. And as those fields have progressed, for people to acknowledge that animals may have just as complex internal lives and personalities as we do. And so that's been really kind of exciting in this field because we can now speak about animals having personalities and likes and dislikes and wants and differences amongst individuals. And that's backed up by neuroscience, by behavioral research. And it's not anthropomorphizing anymore in the way that it would have been 20 or 30 years ago, which is really exciting.
Why was that the dominant view, that it was inappropriate to ascribe emotions to animals?
I think for a handful of reasons. You're kind of classically trained to avoid doing that, to avoid projecting your own perceptions on what might be happening.
Because it messes up the data. Messes up the data.
And it also may make you, as a scientist, unobjective to what you're studying. Right. So, like, a best example of this is, like, not giving animals names. For the longest time, I think both in zoos and aquariums and in research, if you were studying animals, they had numbers. It was like, this is specimen H22351, or whatever, as opposed to this is Steve. And the rationale for that was like, Steve, giving an animal or something a name kind of personifies it, whereas giving the animal or something a number objectifies it, and it's a lot easier to distance yourself from an object than it is a living thing. Like, and so it was another way to keep science hard and cold and
makes sense. Because what if Steve was the bully that I had in third grade? I hate Steve.
You hate Steve,
That is such a dick. That's Steve. Yeah. Anyway, I don't know if I can say that on podcast, but whatever. I'm just kidding. His name wasn't Steve. His name was Matthew. Screw that guy. Anyway, so that makes sense. So they didn't want to. They wanted to maintain objectivity in research and to want to impart their own stuff on the results. That makes sense. All right. So, but now that has changed.
That's changing.
So, all right.
It's changing, and emotions are always going to be a part of anything anybody does because humans are emotional beings. And you can separate those two. And I think there are definitely places where those emotions in science should remain separate. There are times where it is inappropriate to attribute human emotions or human motivations onto animals, and that's still totally valid. But we are learning as more research comes out that there are a lot more commonalities, both physically, like I think most of us have come to realize the physical similarities that we may share with other organisms around the world through evolution and phylogeny and family trees. And that's easily kind of addressed, but it's getting at these internal states, things that aren't as easily seen, that is starting to gain a little bit of traction, and recognizing that thinking about that emotionally may actually get you answering and asking questions that wouldn't have been asked otherwise.
Sure. And so like for example, is this animal feeling jealous?
Right.
Like that kind of thing. Like that happens with dogs, right? Like I feel like that happens with dogs. I don't know.
Yeah. And if you brush that question aside or think that question is not worth answering, in my opinion, that's a bit antithetical to the scientific method as a whole.
Trying to understand better what's going on with these creatures. Yeah.
Right. Maybe it's not jealousy, but maybe it's something else. And you wouldn't know that if you didn't ask that question, and you didn't try to develop a study that would try and address or answer that hypothesis in a way that's relevant to that animal's biology. I think that's the key. Is like, if you're asking these questions, you need to be then creating a structure in which the questions are being tested for the way the animal interacts with the world. For a long time, those questions were asked through procedures or tests that would work really well for us. We've got hands and we experience the world in very different ways than a lot of the animals that were being tested. And so a lot of these animals weren't passing these cognition tests or these intelligence tests because they weren't set up for their biology, and they weren't set up for the ways that those animals interact with the world. And the second a researcher was like, I think we could change this because this animal does this and not this.
Right.
Then we kind of opened the floodgates a little bit more, and we're like, oh, we were really thinking about this and animal behavior as a whole through a really narrow lens. And maybe animals are more capable of what we give them credit for.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes total sense. Like if you're measuring them by pressing a button, maybe don't know how to press a button. you know, like that. Maybe they're just. It reminds me of that old Onion article in that old satirical newspaper that said, "Study proves babies are stupid," and it was all this stuff about how they like they threw a baby in a pool and it didn't even try to swim. Like they put it on an anthill and it just got stung. It didn't move, stuff like that. And like how dumb babies are. It's just funny because I'm like, I just don't understand the baby's life, what a baby can do. Anyway, yeah, that's really interesting. So tell me, because this is always what happens on these podcasts where I go off on tangents and then leave no time to discuss the technical aspects of things. But tell us, if I just want to cover quickly, like how you do in your particular job. I mean, you're managing this network. So you are interfacing with a lot of network members. You're getting resources out there. You're doing webinars. You have this membership site that people go on. Can you just tell us, I mean, because we have like a couple minutes, just tell us some highlights and lowlights of that and include, if you can, something about technology.
Yeah. I mean, I'll start with technology because the fact of the matter is we are a global network, but a lot of the people and organizations within our network are based in the US. We're across time zones, we're across states. And so a lot of what we do is virtual, and we rely really heavily on our website, our discussion board, and platforms like Zoom to connect with each other and get stuff done. And so it's really important for us to have easy to navigate and functioning platforms that allow people to easily connect with each other and find the resources and events and things that they're looking for. Because without that, the network just doesn't function in a way that's beneficial to anybody within the network. And so, yeah, technology is literally embedded into the day-to-day of how this network functions. Can you repeat the first part of your question?
I don't. Oh, highlights and lowlights. Things that are very frustrating versus things that are good.
Yeah. I think things that are frustrating, I mean, it's the flip side of that technology coin, right? We're across time zones, we're across states. There's a lot of things that are a lot easier and to get done in person and have those in-person conversations with people. And especially in this context, we're not on grounds at those zoos and aquariums like the majority of the time, right? And so I can only have so much of an understanding of the struggles that people are going through, or even like what their environment is that they're working in because I'm not physically there. So it makes doing site visits and things like that incredibly valuable. But that is an inherent challenge of doing the virtual work. However, one of the plus sides is people within the network, and myself included, I know so many incredible people that I've met through this network, that a lot of them have like become pretty close friends. And like we text each other regularly. And so it's not only like this professional network that we've created, but to some degrees it is like a personal network. And I know that those people will like be happy to bounce ideas off me forever. And so it's really fun to see either those relationships that I have with people develop or see connections that other people make with each other through the network, personal or professional, and watch those kind of develop over the years. And some of them have spawned really cool projects and really cool professional relationships. And I think that that's really exciting because we're all motivated by the same, if not very similar things. And we're all just nature nerds who want everybody else to nerd out about nature with us. And it's really fun to get people talking to each other.
It is. And I remember seeing when we were doing the project too, I remember seeing people share, I guess the example was signage. Somebody had said, hey, I have these cool signs that we put up in some zoo and do you guys want to share it? You want the data? And then they could send a PDF of the different signs using empathy practices. Here's how we put empathy practices in the signage. I thought that was like, wow, that's like a really concrete way that you guys are sharing information and helping people.
And that's, a perfect example. Like I think one zoo one zoo did a signage project, and it was kind of a big deal. They put the names of the animals on the signs and all of these likes and these dislikes and like a fun personality quirk or fact about them, which is like, that's a big thing to do in a zoo or aquarium, to like redo all of your signs and to personalize them to that extent. And that kind of caught on like really strongly. And now multiple zoos in the network have cited that initial project as like, they did this and we realized that this is feasible and this is possible and it's not actually as scary as we thought it would be. And we want to do this. And so we're going to do this. And the outcomes of those, both for staff and just for guests of those projects, has been really cool to see as a result of that like collaborative nature of the network.
Yeah, that's all you, man. That's you. That's you bringing these people together. Listen, I wish we could talk forever, but I just have one last question for you, which is really just if people want to find out more about you, about the work of the network, et cetera, where do they go?
Yeah, so we have a website that was created by BFC Digital, and it's fantastic. I love the website. It is www.aceforwildlife.org. And that'll take you to our homepage and you can figure out all you need to know about the network. You can also reach out to me or anybody else on the Advancing Empathy team at Woodland Park Zoo if you want to connect with us directly at empathy@zoo.org. That's our email address. And we're always happy to talk with you. Whether or not you're in the conservation field, I think a lot of the practices that we employ as zoo and aquarium professionals are relevant to spheres outside of just zoos and aquariums and can help anybody with anything. The world needs a little bit more empathy, regardless of whether or not you're in conservation.
Oh, come on. It is the secret. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really, really appreciate it. It's been great to talk to you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This is really, really fun. And this was my first podcast ever. So thank you.
Congratulations. Listeners, can you believe it? She's a professional. Come on. She's done many, many podcasts. All right. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Nonprofit Thrive podcast. We'll see you next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.